My name is Jess. I'm with the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, and I will facilitate this plenary session. I would like to thank you very much for attending it, and by making this a lively event through the intensive dialogue sessions that we had in the course of the day. I learned from my intelligence that, of course, they're placed everywhere, that the majority of them were really active. Well, I would like to thank you for this. And as somebody who's slightly involved in the preparation of the whole thing, of course, your happy faces are our reward. Without further ado, this particular panel is in an extremely fortunate position because it can actually reap all the benefits that we're understanding and managing the nexus. So you, the panel that will now enter the stage, is in the perfect position to tie all these different threads together and weave a nice little picture for us, for the way to then implement it in the way forward panel. There are two alterations to the panel. First is Minister Auroldo Cerdas from Brazil will make his statement in the panel to follow, and Mr. Clemens Neumann from the Federal Ministry for Food, Agriculture and Consumer Protection has to be in the negotiations for a new coalition government, which is, I think, let's see whether this is a good sign or not, but at least he cannot be with us now. Okay, I would like to introduce the panel to you. Professor von Braun is the director of the Center for Development Research in the University of Bonn. Thank you very much for coming. We have Peter Plöck from Summer of Soil. He's the co-founder of Summer of Soil. Please join us here. Anna Euler, she is the executive director from the Amapá State Forestry Institute. Amapá, for those of you who know, is part of the Brazilian Amazon to the very far eastern end. Thank you very much, Anna, for joining us. Marita Vigatale, she is the trade and food security expert at Oxfam, Germany. Marita, thank you very much for being with us. And last but not least, Majojo, who rocked the boat last year with his presentation, so I'm very glad that we can count on his contribution today as well. Thank you very much, Majojo. For those of you who participated in the earlier plenary debates, what we are trying to achieve through these debates is actually getting these debates that happened in the dialogue sessions together and bring them to the plenary and have our experts who are represented here make them reflect upon these and embed these insights into their perspectives. And the first thread rapporteur whom I would like to call to the table is Roland Scholz. Roland, please join me here. And you attended an extremely interesting session on the question urban millennium, the question of virtual soil imports, and the questions of how to move cities towards more sustainable pathways. What is it that you can bring us from this session?
Well, we were looking and discussing about soils and global urbanization. And here, of course, the question of land take and sealing has been in the foreground. The first point we touched has been how important is soil for food, and 95% plus of the food comes from agro-soil. If you look at the agro-soil and we look at the fertile soil, we exclude the highly weathered tropical soil, which takes years to become an agro-soil from the nutrient profile and from other issues. Only 13 to 18% of the soils are fertile soils. Then the question, how much is now in the urban setting? And for me, it was a little surprising, it's 0.2% if you look on what became artificial land use. But if you look at it from a different perspective, if you look, for instance, from the night light, how soil function has been changed, it is already 0.6%. And if you take another perspective, you can see that the urban areas are built on the most fertile soil. And we make a calculation of this, you may end up with 1%. This has been the first thing we thought about. So sealing is an issue. And with the Berlin case also, there's much thought about how much cost desealing, resealing. And if you think how easily we grab land, and then if there is a factory being built and renaturing it, no one has the money for that. So the idea has been that we should induce a kind of tax for sealing, reflecting on this soil use. Then we came to two cases, Bogota and Shanghai, and here very much the idea of reshaping towns, cities, going for new city models have been in the foreground. And one thing we know for long, since 20 years, that we also have to reflect on the eco-functions urban settings can build. We have to think about the connectivity. We have to reflect on the water flows, on the nutrient flows, and also on the energy. Energy is also heat, on the local climate, microclimate, which brings in the systems. We may look at urban systems with respect to soil. Then the key idea has been we have to grow vertically. This has been also something which came from the Bogota case to restrict the extension of soil use. And in here, we need some literacy about the geosystem, about the ecological system, to do it meaningfully. With the Asian case, we know that urban agriculture is a very, very important issue. Urban and peri-urban agriculture. But now we can see also from statistics that it's a little disappearing. Urban agriculture shows its own feature with a completely overuse of fertilizers. I'm running a project on this, which also has to be changed. But there are new technologies like agroponics, container-based, multi-level, multi-floor, not houses, but multi-floor agriculture production, which may come in, so there is some innovation. But not only the social, the technical system may change, and if you look how we consume agro-products, we also have to reflect on food littering and food waste. And the Chinese in Shanghai, they had a perfect idea. You all know if you are in a restaurant and you can see if the waiter is going back and you're looking on the plates, there's so much food on it. And this food is not recycled to animals and pigs. It's lost. 50% of the food is lost in some developed countries. So they introduced a law that no one can make a second order if this plate is not empty. And I would strengthen the law and apply what I've taught to my children. Nobody can leave the restaurant if the plate is not empty. So would ask for some new systems. Finally, the technical part is important, but the social processes have to be reflected for reshaping, rebuilding cities and changing the flows and appreciating the soil. Here we had a very good story from Bogota. And I was surprised about the process. On the one hand, we had public participation. We had proposals. One out of 100 citizens of the 7 million made a proposal for changing the city. 52,000 proposals and inputs. Incredible. And this is public participation. And the second thing I could learn from Bogota is that they also have a strong involvement of scientists, but they are consultants. They come from the top and they coach the politicians in the complexity management of this urban transitioning. This is only possible under strong leadership. If this would not be the case, neither participation nor the consultancy involvement of the scientists would have taken place. This is one issue, one thing we could learn. Finally, to end up and to look at the issues in general, I can see that due to the technical instrument of GIS and others, we are getting access to the data for evaluating and measure the urbanization and the impacts we have. And we also can look for indicators which we may communicate. But this takes some time, but we have the basis for doing so. And we have developed the understanding. Second is the social processes which take place in sustainable transitioning of cities is most important. And my idea is that we should go beyond public participation under strong leadership and control and consultancy, but that there are also other processes like transdisciplinary process and a kind of pre-decision consensus formation may be something which is needed. Thank you.
Roland, please stay here. Please stay here. Thank you very much for this report back. Peter, why don't you join us here?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I had the pleasure to be in Bogota this summer, and I was really intrigued by the approach taken by the government, which works very much through the formal administration. And the approach that Summer of Soil is taking towards societal change regarding more sustainable soil use is somewhat different. And I would wonder, Peter, if you could please be so kind to reflect on those aspects that you heard from Roland.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a little bit the context, just so that you understand where I'm coming from. I always find it really funny to be referred to as an expert. I'm in no way an expert on soil. I found out 2 years ago from Volkert Engelsman, who unsealed some tiles outside here, and after reading the State of Europe, State of Soil in Europe report, decided to get into action. And then within 2 years, now I'm suddenly here as an expert on the Summer of Soil, which I think things can go pretty fast. That's kind of nice. But to reflect on the session, I mean, it touches on a lot of topics that we found out in the process of Summer of Soil. For example, with land close to cities being bought from small farmers where, for example, family farms where the children have actually moved away, and what do? A developer comes in, offers you a big amount of money to build all these beautiful buildings. Yeah, that's the most obvious choice. And then for the young people that have lived in cities and have realized, actually, I would want to go to this piece of land and start something there, like me and some of the other young people that were involved in Summer of Soil, where do you start? In no way you can compete financially with anyone buying this land. You have no background in agriculture, so it's sort of like, how do you get through anywhere to a piece of land in a city? But on the other hand, there are also some examples. I'm originally from Holland, from Haarlem, and the city has actually now made an initiative based on the citizen initiatives to just take land in the city and illegally grow vegetables, to recognize that and invite them to the city hall and actually map all the possible areas for urban farming in the city, and actually encourage them to take initiative. So and that also happened only in the span of 3 years. So there's sort of challenges for young people like me in cities to be involved with initiatives like Princess Garden here is such a wonderful initiative. Also, very challenged by the city authorities here to continue and needing 30,000 signatures from people to sort of remain here. So there's sort of two sides to the picture.
Thank you. Roland, any immediate reflection on this?
No, but I'm just thinking that soil should not become an alien for urban children. And I noticed this with a psychological experiment I made 20 years ago, that some people some children are afraid of forests. If you want to go, suggest that you should go on a map through a forest, they are afraid as it's unknown territory. So we need something, what you are suggesting, bringing the young people also into the understanding and reflecting of what mindset children have, as they are the decision makers in 10 years. Yeah, is a very important point, which may be stressed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any city, regional, town planner in the room? That's very poor performance. Okay, anyway.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Luca just yesterday demonstrated to us that he's really a high performer in many respects. And he is the one who is actually in the position to report on 4 different sessions. That's why we split it up a little. Luca Montanarella, chairman of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel of Soils and from the Joint Research Center of the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, yes. Indeed, I'm afraid you have chosen the less suitable person for such a job, because I'm pretty known to be somebody who usually doesn't resist the temptation to say what he thinks. So as an ambassador, I'm definitely not the right person. And particularly, you gave me the task to synthesize 4 sessions, while one of them I was the chair and the organizer in the morning, so I could not go in the other 3 sessions. So it's even worse, the task that I was assigned. But of course, I was very well briefed by your collaborators.
And don't take, this is the closing countdown, not your countdown.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. I go right away to the 4 sentences I will say on 4 sessions. I was briefed, as I said, very well, and I was understanding that the most prominent session of the 4 was the 2.6, addressing restoration and rehabilitation of degraded, reclamation of the degraded sites, a session which is claiming gaining ground against the title of this conference, which is losing ground. So in that session, we had a presentation of what case studies from Brazil, Namibia, and India. And I looked to the notes that were kindly provided of what was surprising in this session. Presentations show the potential of gaining ground rather than losing ground of already degraded sites. Yes. Possibly for reclamation to be an area of investment, definitely there's a lot of possibilities of investment in degraded areas. Politicians and state institutions, even if not involved in soil resources, show a high interest in restoration, reclamation, and sustainable resource management. Second question was, were any new and promising approaches discussed? What are these approaches? Well, soils plus livestock plus as part of a promising solution, networking and monitoring between institutions regionally and globally, cross-cutting threats, demand for cross-disciplinary institutions, difficult to find, communicate in appropriate language by appropriate means, use new media, TV programs, and so on. Explore possible markets for rental, reclamation, and restoration, and I'm sure that this is a very interesting point, because I'm sure there's a lot of potential for business opportunities in degraded lands. So now I think you wanted to have
I wanted to stay you here with me, and I would like to invite Majojo to join us.
Yes.
Majojo, if I hear of these tremendous market opportunities that are identified, and bearing in mind that it is often not the most well sort of networked people who live on these marginals, often they're vulnerable, marginalized. I'm always wondering, but if all these large-scale land restoration efforts took place, how do we actually ensure that these actually benefit those who might live on these marginal lands? And there, of course, the other question of security of tenure, of the process, the social process of actually guarantee these rights to the people are of utmost importance. And I would like to ask you to, against this backdrop, maybe reflect on these efforts of large-scale land restoration.
Thank you. I will probably try to put the issue in a little more general perspective, which is that we are facing land degradation sometimes in a very visible manner, where, for example, the land has clearly in a direct manner losing its productive capacity, which can be observed. But there are many cases where, for example, the land capacity to productive capacity is being declined without being noticed. So I think that where we have a severe land degradation, at the same time you will be observing also that the claim to the land and also the land rights tend to be, the trends tend to decline. I think that sometimes can cause also as an opportunity. What do you mean that re-engaging and reclamation could be also a way of reallocating land in the much more democratic, equitable manner compared to the pre-existing situation? In many cases, you observe that possibility. For example, even when land which is customarily managed, there is also in many cases inequality, especially in many cultures, women's land rights tend to be neglected. But when you have a possibility to re-engage, to restore the land, one of the conditions for re-engaging could be that the land could be more equitably distributed compared to the past. Now, what we are also observing, to come back to your specific question about the market for that, is that we are observing the large-scale land acquisitions where, for example, investors from private companies from the West and also countries that are densely populated and need to ensure their food security, or also Gulf states that have a wealth of money from oil revenues want to go abroad and to invest. In many cases, what we are observing is that these investors, they are target the richest soils where they have abundant water resources. That is the current practices being observed. Maybe what could be considered in the future is that governments, where they have exhausted all their capacities, like the targeted government like mine in Senegal, could, when they to direct the investors to the land that need to be reclaimed, because these will require a lot of investment. But that could be probably a way of, for example, putting back this land into productive capacity. That is one possibility that could be explored in the future. So the market, they will make the investors go not to the most productive land, but the land that need really, that are almost neglected. So that will be the option. The other thing that is much broader, that's why I say that we need to put it in the broader perspective, where even the land which is producing much less need to be looked into more in detail. Because currently the situation we are facing, I was in China last week, that these countries, they was just very, very concerned about their own food security. And the fact that their grain land is shrinking. It's observing in China, it's being observed in India. If the trend continue, what I call, my author called the Japan syndrome, will repeat itself. That means that these countries, while they grow, their economy developed, they will allocate the land in non-productive uses. And therefore, they will have to rely more and more on imports. If it is a country like Japan, it is affordable. The world can respond to it. If it is South Korea, yes, we can. But if it is a country like China and India, if we have to import massive food, then the world will have face the question of how the world will be able to feed itself. What the country they are facing, in fact, is the soil degradation issue in countries like China, etc., is in fact in the area where they have invested in irrigation mostly. They're using, for example, surface water, using groundwater resources. But the potential associated with rainfall, rain-fed, where the retention capacity of the soil is really where we have still a margin for another revolution. We have called the revolution of the past the green revolution, but in fact it was really a blue revolution. That means a revolution using blue water, the water on the lakes, the water in the rivers, rather than the rainfall. I think what we need now in order to solve the world food security need is to reinvent another revolution that will be the green water revolution, management revolution. And this is really a soil issue, soil management issue. That is where we need to look at the soil degradation issue in another direction that is not only visibly degraded, but soils also that could have an unexploited potential for responding to, for being more productive in the future. I think that these are some of the elements I would like to put on the table.
Thanks, Majojo. Anybody here from the session who would like to respond to this debate? Professore?
I think it's high enough. Just to put the the title Gaining Ground was not a contradiction to the Losing Ground one, to make that very clear. Some people ask me, you're giving a better expectation to that. Not at all. We are focusing on capacity building of already so-called degraded land. And beside that, we learned good examples from Namibia and Brazil in order to say, well, what is a degraded land? We don't use that in a precise thing. According to the international classification, we estimate that heavily degraded land or severely degraded is maybe about 30%, but what are we going to do with the rest of the 70? I think this is a differentiated approach, and I ask you to separate that. But we think in, let's say, not only production or biomass production, but also, let's say, rehabilitation, restoration of ecosystem function, water, and so on. That could be a part of the story.
I take yet another story from that session. Somebody from the session who wants to respond? No, thank you. Well then, thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you.
Luca, now you have the task to have a report on the other 3 sessions.
The other 3 sessions. All at once?
All at once.
Oh my goodness. The other 3 sessions, well, let's start me for the first one. The first one was dedicated to research, actually. And it was a session co-organized by the European Commission together with projects that are relevant to the topic, of course, DesertNet International, the Snowman Network, and the project CityClore. So it was dedicated to research, and particularly was titled Making Connections Between Soil and Societal Changes, Transdisciplinary Collaboration, and Strengthening the Science Policy Practice Linkages. So very close to my topic indeed. Pity I couldn't attend. So I need to rely on the notes and the briefing I've received. And what was surprising indeed in this session is that regional existing information can be incorporated in global science research. How do we generate economic benefits from scientific research? Private sectors have some role to play, indeed. Researchers are not always rewarded for transdisciplinary work, and I think this is a big topic. Indeed, we always talk about researchers not doing it, but indeed there's very little incentive also for academic careers in doing this. Then there was, where are any new promising approaches that have been discussed? Well, for the science policy interface of UNCCD to be successful, there is a need for a reporting mechanism that keeps the system going in the long term, was said. Communicating scientific findings, value chain integration will bring many actors together. The question came up, should we fund research or project practitioners? Division of roles will contribute significantly to our society. The next Global Soil Week should involve more participation of private sector. Competition for funds is now intensive. This is no news. And our projects must be co-designed with concerned stakeholders. This is, I think, a very important point. Finally, there was a remark on data. Data policy must be open, making it accessible to actors. Indeed, the data access issue is something which is always coming back again and again. Going on, the next session, since we already dealt with the 2.6, it was the 2.7, and this was the session I attended in full, since I was one of the organizers together with WWF. It's a session dedicated to soil awareness raising and all the communication and awareness raising issue. A very animated session full of participants. The room was too small, unfortunately. And by the way, marked by the surprising opening performance of a theater actor, Fräulein Barbara Geiger, who is Fräulein Regenwurm, Mrs. Earthworm in English, which gave us a very, very impressive presentation and performance in placing the earthworm at the center of our attention. And this marked the rest of the debate quite prominently, I would say. The session was also marked by the exploration of all the interlinkages between us and soil, also from the cultural, psychological, historical, religious even sides, all these hidden links between us and soil that often are forgotten. And so it was a session that identified common ground we are all attached to the soil, and we want to find more effective ways of combining understanding and our emotions about soil. There was a lot of emotional discussions with activists present in the room, which was very eye-opening and very interesting, I find. We confronted our motivational structures and communication patterns. We surrounded ourselves with images of living soils. The theme of living soils was recurring. This is one of the things that mostly brings people close to soil. There was plenty of open invitation for collaboration, and we look forward how this session will evolve into a real action plan and possibly a campaign by WWF or other interested partners for a world global campaign on soil awareness, a soil campaign for the world, if you want, maybe linked to the potentially endorsed at the General Assembly of UN International Year of Soils for 2015, and all the related awareness-raising initiatives that we can launch connected to that. Let me go in my 5 minutes to the last session. I'm probably already above time, but the chair will excuse. The last session was indeed organized by UNCTAD together with other partners, from Ethiopia and Brazil, and was showing 2 case studies from Ethiopia and Brazil related to the report that UNCTAD presented, Wake Up Before It Is Too Late. This report here, that was the basis of the session and also, I suppose, of the case studies. What I have been briefed about is that this session came up with the recognition that there's little recognition and support for the fact that 70% of world population is fed by smallholder farmers, but they received indeed little recognition. Industrialized and globalized agriculture, monoculture, led to unsustainability of agricultural production systems. Agroecology was discussed as one of the promising approaches to sustain agricultural production systems. New ways of communication among science, policy, and farmers, which recognize the research abilities of farmers, need to be tapped. Then came up a question at the end of this session, indeed, that is an interesting one. Can organic farming feed the world? Or is conventional farming actually feeding the world today? Another question. So in this dichotomy, I close my brief synthesis. And my apologies to all the session participants if, as an ambassador, I was really not reflecting all the things that have been discussed. Sorry for that.
Thanks, Luca. Professor von Braun, Professor von Braun, I think that the question of agricultural production systems and how they impact on the state of soils or the state of layer degradation, and the question of how to construct transdisciplinary research applying the adequate communication modes are themes that are very close to your heart, and I would ask you to please be so kind and embed these considerations that you just heard in your professional experience. Thanks.
Thank you. I enjoyed listening to His Excellency Ambassador Luca. I think he did a fabulous job. Let me start with the second point which you made. You said in that group on awareness raising, there was a lot of emotion. As a dry economist, I tell you, we need that. Why? Why do we need to get emotion into giving soil a voice? Because soil is not only a market good, it is also a public good. And unless we find ways to give soil a voice through good pixeling maps and through realistic movies, as we had one in a session this morning, the public good function of ecosystem services, etc., which have been mentioned several times here, will not get the floor. So we need those emotions, not emotions for emotions value, but the economic valuation of land is up, the market value is up, and that's why we are probably here. But that's not enough. If you look at the value change, if an African farmer cuts a hectare of forest, the world loses about $5,000. And if there's a cornfield planted, the gain is about $500. But most of the loss is in terms of global public good loss, climate, biodiversity, and broader ecosystems functions. So we need to get these public functions of land and soil involved. Then you talked about research. For me, in order to give soil a voice, research has a key role to play. Even before Soil Weeks, we spoke about groundbreaking research. We need groundbreaking research, not because of the title of our conference, but because who can give soil a voice? It's public goods function. It is farmers and it is scientists, and those who try to speak for those two groups, civil society in between. So we need a lot more sound science and research. And let me refer to a speech which I heard in a group this morning from Senegal. My conclusion is from that story that unless every country has a dedicated institution that focuses on soil science, soil knowledge, on assessing carefully what's good and bad about projects and programs, so which has evaluative capacity, we will not get soil a voice. So Senegal apparently has a dedicated institution which can harbor dedicated people. Soil scientists, economists, this all is multidisciplinary. On your last point, you asked some, you got into, I think, the swamps rather than from the dry area. Should it be organic or should it be conventional in terms of how to feed the world? That the world today is fed by science is probably not known enough. The total productivity growth which comes out of sustainable intensification, which is more knowledge by farmers, more science. So knowledge is driving the growth that feeds the world. It's not more land, it is not more water or more fertilizer. It's the knowledge base. And we need sustainable intensification on the land which we have today. If we don't get that, then we encroach further into the areas which we shouldn't get into forests, into swamps, and so on. So let me simply answer with a buzzword to your closing remarks. Should it be this or that? No, it should be in the middle. Sustainable intensification, producing a lot more with a lot less. Thank you.
Thank you. Luca, as the chairman of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel of Soils, how would you advise us and the audience on how to bring these debates and feed these debates into the work that the ITPS is doing? How do we get involved in the various elaborations in this context?
Let me first make a last remark to the previous one.
Please.
There is a saying in Italy, ambasciatore non porta pena. It means the ambassador is not the one who made the final statement, just to be sure that this was clear. But yes, what the ITPS can do, I mean, this is depending on the work program that we have for 2 years, that it's already now decided. As you know, probably the flagship product of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils will be the World Soil Resources Report that we would like to present in 2015, which will be a state-of-the-art report about the status of world soil resources, of course, then put forward through the appropriate channels of FAO. So this World Soil Resources Report that we plan for 2015 is, to me, the assessment of soils in the world. We will very much hope, and that's the idea behind that, that this would be a collaborative effort of many, many scientists that are having all the competences that obviously are not currently represented in the panel, which, as you know, is nominated in an intergovernmental process, and it's made up of 27 experts nominated by the various regions. So it would be great if we could create a network, starting from today in this event here, of contributors to that assessment, a little bit the process used for assessment done by other panels, IPCC and others. So using all the networking possibilities we have to bring together the necessary knowledge to make really the state-of-the-art assessment of what's going on globally on soils.
Thanks. Professor Brown, what are the 3 core topics that you would like to see in this report?
In his report?
Yes, in the World Soil Resources report.
Well, I think we need a clear evidence-based section on how to monitor a net zero land degradation goal in order to get the job done progressively towards ending the waste of the world's soils. Secondly, I think given the great diversity of the world's land degradation situation, I think we need to connect that to a powerful revamping of the science system focused on that, so that you can make the connection between the science community and the pixels in mapping them both. So a mass movement is not enough. It needs to have clear structures on the side of the science community. Then science gets also a more productive voice rather than just a cacophony of soil is important. And lastly, I think I would wish that the information on the world's soils and progress, good progress, is reported on a continuous basis and not just with one big bang every 10 years. So it needs to be really a continuous effort, because we will learn on the way. Lots of things which we don't know today will come about. I mean, that we have learned in some of the sessions today that we have now a lot more knowledge on how to rehabilitate, which lots of people had written off. Rehabilitate degraded soils. It is not so expensive with good scientific and technological know-how to bring back in certain areas which have been written off in Egypt and in West Africa. So we need to overcome this fatalism, what's lost is lost, and get the act together on rehabilitation.
Thank you. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On this positive note, I guess you're all burning, so I would like to open up the floor to a round of brief reflections. 3 things on that. First, if you have a question directed towards a particular thread ambassador or panelist, please say so. Second, please identify yourself briefly. And third, always think of Shakespeare, who said, "Brevity is the soul of the wit." So the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Noah Damte from the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture, Switzerland. My question is, how can we ensure that those who degrade the land take responsibility to restore and to reclaim it? Because when you come to some developing countries, the law is said that government has power to give exploration to investors to come and mine these minerals. There are nice packages and documents on environmental impact assessment which shows that they are going to restore and reclaim. But at the end, it is left at the mercy of the poor farmers. And who should take responsibility to ensure that this is done?
Ratan in the front.
Luca, as a chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel, how would you assess, similar to IPCC, every 4 years or every 10 years, how much land is degraded and how much has been restored? the question that Dr. Von Braun asked you, how do you monitor? How would you organize such a program that on a very periodic interval, we have an objective assessment?
Luc.
Thank you, Luc Nyakaja. 3 quick points. The first one, can we still continue affording to call some land marginal land, which has a connotation of useless land? And second, a question to Luca. Am I correct in hoping that in 2 years' time we will be able to really overcome the challenges, methodological challenges of really mapping degraded land and land with potential for restoration in 2 years' time? And the third one is for Professor Von Braun. Is it possible that the initiative of economies of land degradation will correlate with national assessment of potential for landscape restoration, which is underway under the global partnership of forest and landscape restoration? Thank you.
You're very timid. Christian?
Christian Witt with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm missing a vision here when it comes to the science progress on where we want to be in 2 years' time and in 5 years' time from now. I think there's really no excuse for sorting out the data gaps that we're facing. We need to understand in time and space really what's going on with our soils, and we have very cost-effective ways now of doing it. So I would really like to see a very clear progress towards a very systematic approach to mapping and understanding our soils, but also in relation to the crops that we grow and the water that we use.
Thank you. Is this question directed to anybody in particular?
No, I think it's an ask. I'd like to see a vision.
Okay, I'll take one more. Okay, I don't take one more. Okay, Professor Von Braun, would you like to begin? I think 2 of the questions were directed to you.
Do we sit? Do we stand?
Whatever you prefer.
I prefer to stand. It's early afternoon. Let me only pick those which I felt have a strong economics content. The question of land degrader responsibility. I mean, the intuitive answer should be who degrades the land has to get the act together and correct it. I'm not of that opinion. I think those who set the wrong incentives, those who don't get proper contract laws settled, for instance, for land tenure, they are responsible. If a farmer in Ghana has a 1-year contract, she or he mines the soil. If it's a 2-year tenancy contract, soil mining is a bit less. 3-year, it's a little bit less again. So contract security and contract extension is absolutely critical for getting sustainable land use practices in place. If land ownership is threatened, investment will not be forthcoming. So I blame lawmakers and those for part of the problem. It's not for lack of knowledge. We cannot beat up small farmers who degrade the land because of lack of property rights security. But we need to get the information to them. And so that would be my economic political answer to that question. Then Luc Nyakaja asked, can we get ELD together with natural the restoration efforts at national level? By all means, yes. And please let's follow up on that with our 2 teams to make sure that this is happening. I think there is a great opportunity. Regarding vision for data and vision for where do we want to be with fighting land degradation in the future, a great question. I would like to suggest that we need to link the data collection efforts and the proper mapping of where is degradation happening in relation to what crops and how can we move forward from there, we need to link this assessment with an understanding of causality. And that you don't get from snapshot data. So we need to build panel data sets, and we need to relate that to crop technology and lack of sustainable intensification investments locally. So that's where modeling and research comes in, and not just the mapping of the good and bad situations.
Thank you. Luca, you still your mic on, so I would ask you please.
Can I answer from here?
Of course.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Just to clarify, indeed the question is about, it goes to the roots of the operating mode of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils. As you know, this is just a panel nominated by the Global Soil Partnership Partners, which is made by all the member states of FAO plus all the other stakeholders that have joined the Global Soil Partnership. And our mandate is of 2 years of this panel. In 2 years, so in mid-2015, the panel will be renominated and there will be a new membership of the panel. That's why we have a work program for 2 years. Nevertheless, the Global Soil Partnership operates on a much longer term, and it's operating according to 5 main pillars of action. And this brings me to the issue of data, because in our first meeting of the panel, our task was to finalize the plan of action for the data collection exercise that we will have, and that hopefully will also be the basis for our report at the end of our mandate. So it's this Pillar 4 plan of action that was developed by the working group tasked with that, and that was submitted to the panel and is now endorsed and should now be implemented by the Global Soil Partnership members. That will be the tool to collect the data for the reporting exercise, and this is a long-term strategy for data collection, maybe also addressing the question of Christian on the data issue. So this explains maybe that the fact that we need to have regular reporting based on solid data. First, we need to develop the solid data flow in order to be able to report regularly about the state of world soil resources. So we are very optimistic, I think, in hoping that in 2015 we will have the report, but I think it's feasible, and that's what we like to do. Responding to Professor Lal, of course, I hope that then the next panel will take up the same approach, and that would generate then on the long term a regular reporting exercise about the state of world resources underpinned by solid and reliable data sets.
Thank you. Our next ambassador is Director of the Division or Directorate for Natural Capital at the European Commission, DG Environment, Pia Bucella. Pia, thank you very much for being here.
So, I was very pleased to participate in 2 sessions this morning, 2 very different sessions, and both really challenging and interesting. The first session I would like to report on was implementing Rio+20, a new instrument to address soil and land degradation under the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. One first comment on this session was that it was consensual, with the pros and the cons of a session where there is little criticism. Then the session immediately agreed on the fact that we need to work towards a new legal instrument to address land degradation and soil, and that this new legal instrument, though it should be placed under the convention itself, must be broader in its scope than the convention is, because, as we all know, the convention only addresses dry land, so it has not a global scope, while this new instrument should have a global scope. What was also coming out of the debate was that the new instrument should not only be defined by the governments of the member countries to the convention, but that civil society at large, meaning NGOs, meaning local authorities, meaning business, and the role of business was also highlighted, should have a say in the scope of this new instrument. Then a next question was addressing the feasibility of the instrument, and it was very clear that we should aim at a legal instrument, and we should also look and keep in our pockets alternative options in case a legal instrument was not achievable. We know that right now there is little appetite globally for new legal instruments. Then how to collaborate and how to work with the newly established Intergovernmental Working Group, which was established by COP11 of the convention, which took place only a few weeks ago in Namibia, and which has in its mandate to address all the issues of land degradation. And the idea which came out of this panel discussion was that it would be best to work through sustainable development goals, because the next meeting in view of sustainable development goals big conference in 2015 will take place early next year, in spring next year, and that then, thanks to the outcome of that, we could go back and address the Intergovernmental Working Group, which should then really contributing to the establishment of this new instrument. And therefore, yes, this is not what came out directly from the panel discussion, but I think that we have a working group under the Global Soil Week that already works on SDGs, and maybe that this working group could be tasked with taking work forward in this area. This is a question to the audience today. I don't know, should I go on with reporting on the second? The second panel was very different. It was more a practical case study-based panel, looking at how we can address land degradation and reduce poverty, and what is the role of local authorities in these tasks. We were presented with several case studies, and I want to say that all were interesting, but because of limitation of time, I want really to tell you about one case study, which I thought was very telling in that respect. The case study looked at two very different countries, at Botswana and at the DRC Congo. Botswana is a country where 90% of the country is a desert. DRC Congo is a fertile country. It hosts 25% of African fresh water, a quarter of all African fresh water. It hosts 30% of Africa's carbon stocks. So it has an immense value in forests. Moreover, it has immense values in other natural resources. However, if you are looking at the situation on the ground, Botswana rates as one of the most food-secure countries in Africa, while DRC Congo is among the most hungry country in the world. I think that, if I remember correctly, it was the second or the third last country in terms of hunger in the world. So how is it possible where we have two countries which have departing possibilities, natural capital possibilities, so different? And the case study reported that the much better situation in Botswana is possible thanks to effectiveness of its public authorities, of government structures, of efficient management of land. And this shows that in order to be able to address land degradation and to reduce poverty, there is really a need to ensure that governments are part of the solution and that governments listen and that local small farmers, civil society are also part of the solution. And from this panel discussion, I would want to take back one element which also came through in most of the case studies presented, the need to empower women, because women are at the heart of dealing with soil. Very often they are directly in charge of the small piece of land which is in the household. And because by empowering women, we would allow an empowerment of civil society in reducing poverty and alleviating hunger, and in improving land and soil degradation. So this was the outcome of the second.
Thank you very much, Pia. Anna, would you do me a favor? There's probably very few people who, in their day-to-day work, have to deal with these various administrative tiers that Pia has just referred to interacting. And if I'm rightly informed, as the executive director of the Amapá State Forestry Institute, you're responsible for those areas that form the jurisdiction of the state. Of course, there are overlapping areas that belong to the foreign national jurisdiction. Of course, there's claims from the local level. So, from your point of view, the challenges that Pia also outlined, let's assume we get to this point where we have tangible international goals on this. How would you see these different levels to actually bring about the desired change, confronting the challenges that Pia has just mentioned?
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I was just thinking, like 20 years back, I was a student, teenage student in Rio, during the Rio 92 first Sustainable Development Conference. And at that time, I really could face the new challenge that were being set by the United Nations. And being a Brazilian from Southeast Brazil, I looked into the Amazon and said, I have a role to play there. I have a responsibility. I want to help to change the world. At that time, to change things. And then 10 years later, I was in Africa. already as a PhD student, beginning my PhD in an exchange program with Japan, but getting to know about the challenges of Africa and the similarities of the, developing countries, and had the opportunity as a student to focus my PhD and my whole career on how to fill the gaps and the challenges that were set there. And 10 years later, I was in Rio again, now accompanying a decision maker, that's a young politician, that's the governor of Amapá, already proposing public policies and even new policies for the implementation of some goals from 92 and of new goals, especially related to climate change, the climate change issue. And now I'm here, having the opportunity to share the floor with all these experts. And I would like to place my contribution to this audience, saying that the discussions from this morning make me optimistic, because even though we have the challenge, we have the problems of losing ground, we have discussed during these three days many solutions. In my panel especially, we were talking about new approaches, like soil plus approach, livestock plus approach, some new approaches of communication. There was an experience from Ghana, very interesting experience of how to engage the local society, how to engage the rural population in dialoguing with the government and touching ground, really changing the local situation. And I would say that more than problems, we have wishes, and we have commitment. I think everybody here are pretty much commitment. So I have hope that we are gaining ground, like looking to the problem of losing ground, but I have good expectations, and I'm pretty much optimistic that we have a lot of people here, experts here, pretty much committed with good proposals, good solutions. Maybe we need more data. We have to dig data all the time, but we have good proposals, good methodologies for taking this paradigm shift. And I think this is the fuel now for a better future, for changing the future. And if I have to make some recommendations for the next Soil Week, I would say that I miss a little bit the exchange of traditional knowledge with the scientific knowledge. Now, this is our great challenge in the Amazon. We have 300 different languages and ethnic groups throughout Brazil and throughout Latin America and the Equator Line. And then I think that it could be interesting to bring these ancient people with this ancient knowledge and to gather them here to propose new solutions. Because a lot of, I was pretty much touched the first day by the Indian lady, that she was saying, let's come back to the ground, to the soil, to the living soil, because we are part of this whole ecosystem, and we have to look back to our ancient knowledge in order to look to the future. So this would be my contribution.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, in your collection of plus approaches, where's the earthworm plus approach? But probably I might be then. No, seriously. The question of, I know that Brazil has, in very many respects, tremendous policies in place. But the question of how to translate these policies into concrete action on the ground is, as in any other country in the world, sometimes a challenge. So what would you say? Sort of whom are we, what are the stakeholder groups that we need to get involved in order to make this change happen, and maybe even get them here to actually get in exchange with them?
Yeah, that's the question of community buy-in, society buy-in. We were discussing this a little bit in the morning. So we have like this socio-ecological zoning as a law, as a commitment. But if we do not have the tools to do it, not only with the scientists, but with the people, We have beautiful documents, but we have a few chances for implementation. I think that we evolved a lot in Brazil in terms of the dialogue and the participation of the society. We need more, but it's getting better and better. I would say that I myself, being someone that comes from an NGO background and being today in the government is it's a movement that is happening in Brazil. So now people like me have the great responsibility. Wow, now I'm part of the government. How can I address the society? How can I give the answer to the society? It's not easy building network. That's why I'm here, to build network, to propose cooperation. We cannot do anything alone. The world is connected. And that's why I went to Japan. I'm back to Brazil. I'm trying to bring the voices of the forest to the government in order to be sure that the time that I'm there, we are trying to do things together. It's not only pointing fingers. You are responsible. The government is the representation of the society. So if the society demands, if the society has this capacity and buy-in, I think the world is really evolving for that. I think, again, I'm very much optimistic that we have a better future and that we will gain ground.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Pia. When I recall the statement about the stupid politicians or decision takers from yesterday, here you have your counterexample. Last but not least, I see somebody. May I have a microphone, please?
Again, I have to criticize myself that I'm the host and I asking question or contribution. But to combine what Jörg von Braun said with your presentation, I love it that you are the head of a technical panel. Why don't we consider to have an emotional panel for soils? Honestly. And echoing to the question of the representative of the Gates Foundation, we must be courageous enough to give very limited but understandable targets. What is our indicator for success? We discussed it the whole morning, and I believe that is a need now to come to conclusions. Our friends, I repeat what I mentioned this morning, our friends from the climate agenda, they came to the conclusion, 2 degrees, full stop. Nobody comes back and says that is only based on scientific knowledge. There's a lot of differentiation in the world and regional topics and what have you. But they have a clear indicator and they come back and say that's possible or not possible. I understood you in this direction. What can we do in this direction, I believe, is one of the real important questions we have at the end of the day to answer. Because we cannot mobilize people also via emotion if we don't have something like the indicator, are we successful or not? I repeat the second time that we are losing 24 billion tons of soil a year. The journalistic people come back and say, is that more or less? I don't know. And as long as I cannot mention that we are on the right track or the wrong track, it's difficult to make this a topic. And therefore, I appreciate very much this question, and we have to be aware of this. Thank you very much.
I would like to take 2 more reactions from the floor, if anybody feels like it. In the back.
Hey, so just to kind of put it out there.
And please be so kind to identify yourself.
My name is Cuauhtemoc, come from Mexico, United States.
Thank you.
So just kind of as an offering to the scientific world, like, so like all these indigenous farming techniques that have been like in function and in usage for a long time, I know we're looking for like cutting edge ways to, sequester carbon and build soil. And I think it could be a really potent and powerful thing to scientifically break down some of those things, some of those practices, and giving that validity, back into those indigenous cultures and people, and integrating those systems and combining, you know, our scientific body and, you know, our indigenous peoples. Just
Thanks. Professor.
Very short. To the emotions we need. I think we passed so far the option or the huge potential in order to learn from the behavior of previous land use systems. And the question is, and you might criticize me now, Joachim from Braun, but for me it's interesting as a soil scientist, the rationality and irrationality of land use. And I think there's a huge potential, and emotions play a key role. We have to manage that, and we have to deal with that in our recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. I treat these three rather as comments than questions. And last but not, oh, sorry. Well then, can I wait? Well then, you have the floor, so go for it. But you need a microphone, of course. Sorry, may I ask?
Thank you very much. My name is Patrice Berger. I'm from France. I'm from a French NGO and DryNet network. I've just one question and one comment. First question is, sometimes I think that soil and land is not the same. And often we find in our debates and that soil is a too narrow approach compared to land. And not all the people have this understanding. Just giving an example, in the JEF program, they speak about soil and not about land. And so the efforts and the investment is done in the direction of soil. So maybe it should be clarified how far soil and land are related, and maybe make a bit more sound definition. The other thing I want to say, many people have mentioned the question of public goods and the need of involving the private sector. I must say that while most of us are saying that land and soil are public goods, I don't think that this is written anywhere in any law, or maybe in little law. Currently, soil and land is privatized, can be bought, can be exchanged, can be destroyed, and whatever. So while we are saying this is a public good, how far do we, where can we reach that?
Okay.
And just to finish, when we call the private sector, yes, for helping to improving this public good, in between private sector and public goods, we have the governance. And currently, the states, most of them, are disqualified to make decisions. So how to solve that problem? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask the panel to please take note of the question, and we return to it after the next report. Because the next report is very close to my heart, because the topic that we have been addressing over the course of the last year, it actually touched upon the question of how to tackle and how to address the challenges that might accompany the large-scale land acquisitions that Majojo has referred to. And there has been a commitment by the G8 under the Loch Earn Summit to increase the transparency of these deals in order to contribute to responsible land governance. And I'm very grateful that Lillian, director from Sikal Ghana, is with us to report back from the session. Lillian, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, yes. As an ambassador, I thank you for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to also report from the group looking at partnership for responsible land governance. What role for transparency? As an ambassador, I'm so challenged with time to give you a briefing of what really happened in that discussion. So we'll deviate from the normal framework that you gave us, but give you the key messages that we took from that meeting. One of the key issues or key messages we took from the meeting was that transparency is not an objective, but rather it is a means to an end. That transparency breeds accountability. And then accountability will change the theory of the change we seek to have. Therefore, We had the opportunity to discuss other key cases that had happened between the GH summit and then also Tanzania. In the whole case studies, we realized that land transparency is a means, as I have mentioned, to an end to a good governance or a good land governance. So, good governance goes beyond transparency. We look at issues of participation, securing community land rights, equity, and all, and said that the initiative mainly looked at the transparency at the point where the Land Transparency Initiative only looked at the disclosure of data. There were discussions and there were disagreement around what does that transparency brings itself. What kind of data are we disclosing? How is it disclosed? When is it disclosed? And to whom for this data beneficial? And what is the purpose? We realize also in the discussion that in as much as we want to increase enormous information about land deals, it also gives that negative perspective of people looking at language as an opportunity to speculate. Therefore, the discussion said that the Land Transparency Initiative should not look at the transparency at that level in terms of developing country, but rather look at the other initiatives currently ongoing in the country. There was also a question around how these countries that are doing these initiatives are selected. And then issue of participation. We had discussion around, and we think that it was also not enough in terms of the level and the scope. Multi-stakeholder approach was a key, but also seems to be an artificial. It's a challenge. In a sense that meaningful participation is the way forward, taking into account the concerns, the conflicts, and also the participation in terms of benefit was losing out entirely. So at the point we were looking at free, prior, informed consent as against free, prior, informed, meaningful participation. Again, what will transparency bring? I have mentioned that. And we look at also land in its versatile nature as a resource, as a commodity to be traded off. But at what point and in what context do we discuss transparency in that discourse? So the context in which we look at land and transparency must be defined in the discourse. Then we also said that communities' capacity in terms of land governance would refer to their bargaining power is a bit low at this moment. So community must have the right or understand the right to know, must have the right to negotiate, right to review contract, and the right to complain, and even the right to stop the investment if they so wish. Then we agreed also at that forum that there was a missing actor. If you look at governance in total, we are looking at civil society, we are looking at governance, but the private sector in that discussion was missing. So, in moving forward, we said that the Transparency Initiative should really take time, map out the existing priorities of the partnership countries, and be able to understand the existing institutional arrangement. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Marita, why don't you join us? And I know that you have been following this debate rather closely, and I would like to ask you to please be so kind and embed these discussions and the report from Lillian in the broader picture of the necessity of having secure land rights, not only for food security, but also to contribute to the necessary framework to make investments into sustainable soil and land management happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I would like to recall first that poverty in rural areas is very much linked to insecure access to land and water and to low soil fertility. So there is a development case in both areas. We need sustainable soil management on the one hand in order to also as an element to fight poverty. And we, of course, need to ensure that access to land and water is ensured for smallholders, indigenous people, pastoralists, and so on. I think, as was mentioned already, there is sometimes it sounds easy to talk about inclusive, multi-stakeholder platforms, and of course, everybody says nothing against participation and consultation. But in real life, it's pretty much different. For example, I heard from my colleagues in Myanmar, there was a meeting about the implementation of a voluntary guidelines, and the FAO there was very reluctant to invite farmers groups. Civil society organizations then insisted, and finally they managed. Or there was a meeting in Bangkok at the regional level, and civil society was not invited till the last 24 hours. And they made their way finally, but again, it was very difficult because of visa issues and so on to really make sure that participation takes place. So free, prior, and meaningful consultation and participation is a real challenge. The second thing I would like to say is that although people have a voice, which soils do not have, but people do have, this voice often is not heard. And we do have land struggles. The implementation of voluntary guidelines should reinforce and help these land struggles. We had a case in Guatemala, as Oxfam, where about 800 families were evicted in March 2011. And in October this year, 140 of them got their land back. And if you look at the success factors, why was it possible at the end that at least this promise was partially fulfilled by the government? Is at least the one thing is that the government was open to solve the problem, and we hope that the whole debate about the voluntary guidelines makes it more easier for governments to have these kind of discussions about land and raise their commitment when it comes to it. Secondly, it was very, very important to have a very strong farmers movement. So it was the Peasant Unity Committee. So this shows how important it is to empower peasants to really take part. And third thing was that there was an international solidarity campaign around it. So other people joining their voices to really accelerate this process of getting back their land.
Okay, thank you. Lillian, would you have, from the discussion that we heard this morning or from your experience in Ghana, have any immediate reaction to Marita or that you would like to sort of others in the panel to reflect on?
Yeah, talking about involvement and consultation of farm-based organization and civil society is real in these kind of discussions. If I take Ghana, for instance, with the Land Administration Project, for instance, it was just recently that we added the Peasant Farmers Association to the steering committee level. The whole lap one, they were missed out. But if you look at the intent of the project, it was meant towards getting secure tenure for farmers. And yet the farmers were not represented in the whole project of LAP 1, thinking that, yes, there are other organizations that will take care of the farmers capacities were not built to discuss at that higher level. But at what point do we bring them in? And how do we break the language into their own understanding is also one key. So, these are the challenges when it comes to land transparency. Because if a farmer look at it from the point of view of security of tenure, the government look at it in the point of view of commercial agriculture. So at that point, they are also speaking different kind of language in that case.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. I would like to take some comments from the floor to for our panelists to please reflect on. So everybody who feels inclined, shoot.
Can we go back to the previous ambassador?
Ratan, you can go. You can also join me here. Yeah, please go ahead.
He was the only one who brought up the question of urban agriculture, soil-less culture. And he raised the question of 95% of the food comes from soil. And if we were to go urban agriculture of the type you are talking about, glass towers and so forth, aquaculture, aeroponics, geoponics, can that 95% be reduced to what level?
Hold on a sec.
Well, this has to do with the question of carrying capacity in some respect. And if you look at the evolution of humankind, you can count, you can make estimates how many people lived in the gather and hunter technology, in the agro-technology, in the industrial ecology, in the industrial age. And now you are asking me how many people can live and how much food can be provided in the post-industrial age. This is a matter of technology development.
Roland, please bear in mind, we have panelists here, so...
Yeah, and it's a matter of technology development and, of course, of resources management and nutrient management.
Thanks. More questions? Gosh, you must be... Oh, there's a question in the back.
Thank you. I'm Prajal Pradhan from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And I have a question to the panelists regarding yield gap. Like, what is said is like we can produce 80% more food in present cultivated land if we close the yield gap. So, and that's crucial mostly in the rain-fed agriculture and also mostly in developing countries where we are talking about this soil degradation and all these things. So my question would be like, how can we close this yield gap, maintaining this sustainable soil management? Thank you.
Mateusz?
Mateusz from IASS. In the session of transparency, we have a very good presentation that was actually webcast by Skype. And the points were the three questions that we would have to ask on the transparency initiative is what, meaning what type of data, how, who should disclose this data. I think one question that was not posed is to whom this data should serve. And I think it changes completely the picture of transparency. Are we thinking about transparency for securing investments or thinking about transparency to secure land to people which are really depend on it?
Thanks.
Sirajul Islam from Bangladesh. So I just want to know something is missing in this global forum, that is the regional cooperation. You know, sometimes the country like Bangladesh, we are suffering a lot of land degradation, and also sometimes we are gaining some land in terms of sedimentation coming from the upper stream of our neighboring countries. So sometimes, you know, this regional cooperation, like transboundary flow, it is one of the main reasons of Bangladesh degradation land. One side we are having the desertation problem, desertification, and another side in the south we are having the salinity intrusion, and this is because of the transboundary flow of the main international rivers. So something is missing with this regional cooperation, how we can address this to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. An issue that the water community, I think, tends to be struggling a bit for quite a bit of time. But more questions or brief flashlights for our panelists? Otherwise, I hand over. So it's a now or never situation, marriage type of thing. Rimjim?
Hello, I'm Rimjim from Seva Mandir. I work with a non-profit organization in India, and we work with the communities for common land development. So we have been working there for the past 25 years involving the participation from community for the development of common lands. My point of discussion is, yes, I do agree that community participation is very important, and this is also true that people can raise voices. They do raise voices. Sometimes these voices are heard and sometimes they are not. What I want to convey is, in most of the cases, people can only reach up to the local institutions that are more accessible to them and not up to the higher authorities. So whoever they go to and whoever they go and complain, people at many times they do not hear these voices for the purpose of their own local political benefits or all. In that cases, what can be done?
Thank you. Okay. Okay, the last question over there, and then I hand over to my Jojo.
Yes, hello, Koen van Keer from Yara, a mineral fertilizer company. So this seminar has been for me a very interesting experience in the sense that as a soil seminar there is this attention to emotions, which we heard about today, and which I would say when it comes to how to talk and engage with the broader public, who probably knows very little about what's below our feet, I think this is a positive dynamic, but at the same time, I would like to caution that there are very pressing concrete needs when it comes to sustainable soil management, and we should just take care that this emotional aspect does not become too dominant, and that there are many aspects. We talked about soil in the nexus, and there are many different disciplinary aspects related to soil management. There are many different soil problems, but I think what is really key is to prioritize. What are sort of the most urgent problems, and what are the key entry points to solve these problems?
Thank you. Okay, Jojo, would you please start responding to some of the points raised, and please also bear in mind the question of our gentleman in the front on the public or private nature of land, or sort of make a concluding statement, if you like.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking that when the question of land as a public good and soil was mentioned by Professor Van Braun, it was, I think, referring to some of the functions, ecosystem functions. For example, if you are improving soils management, you are also improving the capacity of carbon sequestration, which in fact is the benefit for the entire humanity. But we know also that these resources, soils, are highly disputed and controlled and owned. From that point of view, you cannot consider them as a public good. What if the question, this leads to me, in fact, to the discussion on the transparency issue. The discussion on the transparency issue is currently perceived from the perspective of the investor. The company going abroad and making an investment and making the commitment to act in the transparent manner. We as ILC, International Coalition, we were engaged a lot in the discussion with the G8, etc., etc. But we have repeated what some of the people have said in their panel, that transparency is not an end, it's a mean to an end. The problem is, in fact, that that end is not defined. What is exactly we want to achieve? I think that is where the role of government in many cases, government of targeted country, is lacking. When you go, for example, somebody has mentioned the case of Congo, comparing to the case of Botswana, I think. You will see that, for example, DRC is a highly targeted country in terms of large-scale land acquisitions. Why is that? That is because the country has a weak governance, does not take custody of its own resources. I think that is the problem. That is the main challenges. Where you have, for example, weak governance, you have the tendency to observe that the country becomes highly attractive to the investor, which is the paradox. Normally, the investor goes to a country where the governance is strong, the laws are predictable. That is normally the logics of investment. In terms of large-scale land acquisition, it's totally the contrary. The weaker the governance, the more attractive the country. So that is the reason why we think that the notion of transparency is important. But what is, we need to change the logic is the governance in the countries which have the lands and the water that the world needs, these countries need to set in place very strong governance structures with a component of transparency. Like, for example, the Africa heads of state, they made a commitment in 2009, that is the CIRT declaration, where they commit themselves to, in fact, put land high in the agenda. They make the commitment also to put enough better resources in order to have strong land governance. They say they will develop a land plan, and they will also have it done in a very participatory manner. They have also made the commitment to secure land right for land users, in addition, land for women, etc. All of this, if a government make a commitment to implement those values and therefore have a disclosure policy, everybody can monitor whether the government is serious about that or not. That is where the donor, outside investor, private sector can have a transparency mechanism that will complement the effort of the countries. That is where we need to totally change the logic. The current approach that is being used is totally Euro-centered, while the transparency approach should be centered to the interest, the way the countries, where the resources are located, manage their own resources. That is, I think, that way one of the observations I wanted to make, and also to say that this rush for land is not really about land, it's about water. But if you look inside, you will see that it's not about water alone, it's about productive land, which means that it's about soils. So that is where I think we need to put that equation in the picture when we discuss about the future. So that particular dimension is extremely important.
Thank you, Giorgio. Anna.
Yeah, I will address what the point of Mateus and of the lady in the back. Regarding to transparency, Brazil is experiencing now a mandatory law for transparency, so any governmental, federal, state, or municipality should publicize all the expenditures, but people still do not know how to deal with this, how to interpret all this information. So the first step was done, but now we have to emphasize exactly the capacity of the society to deal with this new right to access all this information. And regarding how local people can have the voice, we have public auctions or hearings as one instrument. But I think that much more powerful than these nowadays are the social medias, at least in Brazil now, and I think worldwide. Politicians are hit by what is being discussed in the social media that can spread quickly, and sometimes even in the public hearings, I've experienced many of them in the last 3 years. The ones that conduct can guide and even sometimes can cut the possibility of local people to express their voices, and these new social medias are much more democratic, I think. That's one point. But coming back to the rights that were, how to say, gained by society, especially in Brazil, but I think in other countries as well, of having public hearings as part of, as mandatory tools, still we need to also to build capacity of facilitators. Because sometimes it doesn't mean, if you put 1,000 people, 100 people to talk together, it doesn't mean that, you know, the most important things are going to come, and that really that the discussion will be fruitful. So, and when we have really people with the capacity to organize the public hearings and this kind of event, like an event like this, the results are much more successful and meaningful.
Thank you. Joachim, there's still the question open on the yield gap. Maybe you feel inclined to get to that.
Okay.
One.
Yeah. I think a good question. I'm happy to address that. I'd also like to say a word on regional cooperation, Bangladesh in the South Asia context. So important, the rivers, the siltation. The regional cooperation, I think, has to be much higher on our agenda. And I would hope that, I think some people have said that already, some of the next Global Soil Weeks settle down in regions, maintain a global agenda, but settle down, say, in South Asia, and have a Global Soil Week in Dhaka, and look local and remain global. But on the yield gap story, I think it's extremely important that we are goal-oriented. The goal is to improve productivity in a sustainable way. And that's where soil is part of the equation. It's not the only part of the equation. And that's where fertilizer comes in. That's where land management comes in. It's a technical, and it's an incentive, and it's a research agenda, and it's the agricultural development agenda. Closing yield gaps requires all of that. The largest part of the yield gap is determined by economic incentives. Farmers don't have the access to markets or don't have the access to technology and so on. But my plea is that we shouldn't look at soil here and monitoring soil there. And over here, we have the whole productivity agenda. We need that alliance between sustainable land use and soil protection, embedded in a broader alliance of sustainable agricultural growth. Then we are strong enough and get the voice for soil. But if we isolate ourselves from the big yield gap story, we will not. So the monitoring also has to focus. The monitoring on what happens, good and bad, to soil needs to be part of this goal orientation, which we need to connect to productivity, sustainable productivity, and ultimately people's well-being improvement.
Thank you. Peter, are we getting too emotional? I mean, if I look at, sorry for that, but if I go through the soil scientific scene, I'm not getting swallowed exactly in emotion. So what's your take on that?
I think we're not getting emotional enough. I mean, I was born in 1985, and it took me 27 years to discover what's really happening in the world. And I've got, based on the life expectancy of a male in Holland, 60 years left to leave the world better than I found it. My name is Ploeg, which is Dutch for plow, and my first name is Peter, which is Dutch for stone. I guess now I know why I have that name. And when I came here last year, I realized that after this event, I went home and I thought, okay, so now someone else, somewhere else, will maybe do something else. And I thought, like, that's never going to change anything. So what I concluded is I am going to change something myself. And how do you know as a human being what you need to change yourself? So at first I thought, okay, maybe I should go vegetarian. That's what some environmental groups say. But then I watched Alan Zavery's talk, and he said, no, you should eat more meat, because if we move cattle around more quickly in Zimbabwe, we can actually restore grasslands. Okay, so what should I do next? Then I go to the store, and I look for a soil-friendly option. How should I know? And when I come to this event, now for the second time, I would assume that the best knowledge in the world about what I can do personally should be here. But it's so hard to access it, because 80% of the time that I've been here, I've just been able to listen. And how do I know, how do I find the right person in the room to tell me what can I do? And especially in my generation, what can we do? You know, we try to grow food, and that's discouraged, and we try to do things, but it's so incredibly hard to get actively involved. And I love this title of that report, The World We Want. You know, if you think about the world that you want, a lot of young people have that question. Especially the young people that are involved with the summer. So I'm just wondering, can everyone under 30 stand up?
Come on, Peter, that's not too bad.
Now, these will be sort of my fellow generation, that's my fellow mates on the planet who will be around in 2050. In this time when there will be like 9-10 billion people, and if it's about the world that we want, how can we help create that world together? That's really my question. And it is an emotional thing because it's not just soil. We talk about the nexus, and it took me a couple of days to discover what the hell that means. But I discovered that it's sort of like, it means that soil and water and energy are related. But I think a lot of young people grow up understanding that everything is related. Everything is connected to everything. That's what the whole world is about. And changing that is hugely complex, but can only be done by doing it. And I think what inspired us so much with the Summer of Soil, we invited people that have actually done something. Like, I wrote a little list down, Yakubu Savadogo. We watched in the Summer of Soil documentary, The Man Who Stopped the Desert. He went up, took a pickaxe, and started digging zai holes. Now that's inspiring. Where are those people? What are they doing? Like Douglas Tompkins in Argentina restoring a farm into the most amazing sort of art farm you can imagine. People that are really doing things. I would love to see, for them to come here and to share with us and to inspire emotionally our generation to get to work on this challenge, which is soil and water and reforestation and everything that we have to do if we don't want to go on the sort of collapse road that previous civilizations have gone on. And I'm determined. I stood up last year in the final plenary as a participant, and I shared this story, and Molly John, who was sitting in the final panel, she challenged me. She said, okay, so you should do that. And I have, and I will. And I think I've also found other young people that will. But what we need is your support to make your knowledge accessible at the next Global Soil Week. Maybe we change the format so we all sit in very small circles and sort of interchange much more, and we all get a chance to speak, and not just the panelists, and sort of accelerate it, because maybe we can all commit actually as young people to bring another one next year. And I'm not saying that just because of the voices of young people are not heard, but it's our future, and we want to actually be involved, and we also can be, but we need to collaborate with you. And I think that's maybe sort of what I would want to say. And I'm very excited about this challenge. I'm taking it on. I'm sort of dedicating my life to it, and I love it.
These were your groupies. Marita.
Yes, thank you very much. I think in terms of transparency to secure investment, I think that was clearly the risk and the danger which we saw when this whole transparency initiative came up. It's very investor biased, and this is why civil society was so critical about this whole initiative. And at the end, I think we were more happy that it's about land governance in its total and the entirety of the voluntary guidelines to be implemented and so on. But nevertheless, I think the transparency issue remains in terms of how to get this information to the communities affected. At the session, we heard that the publication in the internet does help probably us NGOs, it does help the investors, but community people would not know. So I think there the whole issue of, let's say, I think participation of communities, having multi-stakeholder platforms, the responsibility of the government to inform the affected communities in advance so that when they can react to it is very, very much important. What we want to achieve, I think, taking a bit from your perspective, I think is, if we are really serious about the zero hunger, if we are serious about sustainability, I think it's very evident that we need to secure access to land and water of the poor ones, of small farmers, pastoralists, indigenous people, and so on. If we really want to improve soil fertility, I think that was a bit of a discussion which we had yesterday when we had a discussion about fertilizer subsidy programs and so on, and it's just really the right way to go. My conclusion was that first we need a sustainable soil fertility strategy, and then fertilizers can be one component, and if there is a need for subsidies, that's with a big question mark, probably the money is better spent in another way. And lastly, I think when it comes to the question of most urgent problems and key entry points, again, I would like to refer to the issue of inclusive multi-stakeholder platforms, which we saw at the land governance level, but which could as well be applied, I think, to the issue of soil fertility, is that governments are really asked to bring all the people together, the civil society, the private sector, the scientists, and then have the identification of the key problems and the key priorities. Thank you very much.
So thank you guys for bearing with us. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the thread ambassadors. We break for half an hour and then we get back here. Thank you.